This is the best of First and Last, the podcast.
Boy, oh boy, we got to quote the great Steve Harvey, we got a good one for you today. It's the Brady family. It's the Belichick family. Let's go ahead and do it. And do it we shall. So last night, Seth Wickersham went ahead and dropped a sham bomb. Like, I don't know, what can we call it at this point? He's been part of some pretty insightful articles during his time here. This one may be one you hang up on the fridge at the Wickersham household, because his piece documenting the beginning of the end for the New England Patriots that will appear in the ESPN, the magazine from this weekend. Seth, one of our senior writers for the magazine, documents, after talking to a number of Patriots officials and sources, documents the uneasy tension that has been in the building for most of this season and apparently has been building for quite some time. You heard it from him, and we'll play. There's a great feature that we've got for you guys here from Seth, who looks at what we had been hearing and some of the names that have come up here with Tom Brady, his business partner, his coach, his business partner, his strength coach. I'm not even sure of his actual title anymore. It seems so lost in that, basically what would have amounted to a physical therapist, even though he is not actually that, but his business partner, Alex Guerrero, body coach. That's the title I was searching for. Body coach, which an invented position like that should kind of tell you exactly what we're dealing with in this situation. But who we remember was asked to, or had his privileges, had his access revoked in the building after reports surfaced that players became uneasy and uncertain at the prospect of not using Guerrero and what it would mean for their standing with the team. And so when you look at it now, what we ended up with was the Patriots year this year. The Patriots finished the regular season 13-3, home field advantage throughout the playoffs, but with this growing gap between really the three biggest pieces of this organization. Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and Robert Kraft. Tension that's been growing all year. The three of them having serious disagreements over Guerrero, the trading of Jimmy Garoppolo, and more. Take a listen.
The Globe reporting Tom Brady's trainer, Alex Guerrero, has had various team privileges stripped.
Basically, he's not on the charter anymore, not on the sideline anymore.
There have been rumors of friction between Guerrero and the team for a couple of years. So why is this happening now?
After more than a dozen interviews with New England Patriots staffers, players, and executives with knowledge of the team's inner workings, it's become clear that tensions between Tom Brady and Bill Belichick are threatening to fracture the Patriots dynasty. One trigger for these tensions, Brady's trainer and business partner, Alex Guerrero.
I'm so fortunate to have him, not only as a friend, but everything that we've been able to do together. And Alex has been a huge, huge reason why I'm still playing.
As his access increased at Patriots headquarters in recent years, Guerrero and his TB12 alternative treatments have been a growing source of friction. Many players, especially newer ones, felt pressure to take part in TB12. It boiled over this fall when Belichick heard players asking themselves and each other, do we risk alienating the NFL's most powerful coach or risk alienating the NFL's most powerful quarterback? In December, the Boston Globe reported that Belichick had limited Guerrero's previously unfettered access, saying that Guerrero wasn't a team employee, but he allowed Guerrero to continue working with players who sought him out.
How did you react when Bill told you that he was going to do that?
I don't really agree with your question, so I don't know what you're talking about. How do you know what he said?
Look, we have a lot of people that work for our team outside of the team. So I'm not going to go through a case by case of what everybody does. That would be impossible to do, and I'm not going to do it.
Another fault line. Brady's desire to play into his mid-40s versus Belichick's plan to groom Jimmy Garoppolo as an eventual replacement.
I was at an event with Tom Brady when they drafted Jimmy Garoppolo, and he walked up to me and said, "Coach, I don't know why they're doing that. I plan on playing until I'm about 45.
Brady saw Garoppolo as a threat. Belichick saw Garoppolo as the future. High-level meetings resulted in a mandate from owner Robert Kraft. Trade Garoppolo.
The New England Patriots have traded quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo.
It is all on Brady for the foreseeable future.
According to his friends, Belichick was furious, but in the end, he did what was asked. Brady seemed liberated. His new backup, Brian Hoyer, is no risk to Brady's starting job. As one team staffer said of Brady, he won.
And the Patriots will head to the postseason with another first-round bye. They have clinched the #1 seed as well.
The Patriots are still the Super Bowl favorite, but they are in uncharted territory now. There's a sense in Foxborough that this year or next will be the last run for Brady and Belichick. Of all the ironies about the Patriot way, the biggest one is that a philosophy based on team only really needed two men to thrive. That's why it will be impossible to replicate should either of those men leave.
First and last of Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Seth Wickersham will be joining Golic and Wingo later this morning to discuss the entirety of this piece. And as you work through some of the things said in that feature, some of the things written in the article, it becomes very clear that discussion that a lot of us were having about would the Patriots move on from Tom Brady early apparently was not as unilaterally accepted a decision as they would have liked you to believe. Personally, a little validating for me because this is kind of exactly what I pointed out in saying that it was perfect timing for Jimmy Garoppolo to grease the wheel and become your gap to the future. But, you know, I won't pull the receipts or anything. Blow out my shoulder, patting myself on the back here. But it is interesting because Robert Kraft was essentially tasked with playing the judge in this one, sort of mediating between the two, and sided with Brady. And for all of the conversation we've had over years about the importance of one over another, Tom Brady and Belichick's system, or Belichick's system made and bolstered and made greater by Tom Brady's presence, the reality probably somewhere in the middle, but at the very least in this instance, Robert Kraft deciding that at the very least the opinion he valued and the person whose happiness day to day within the building he valued more was Tom Brady. By forsaking what was usually the quote-unquote Patriot way of taking the most prudent approach, of never having to adjust too greatly on the fly because you've already laid the groundwork and stayed a step ahead of things by getting rid of guys a little earlier, by having the next man up waiting in the wings. Robert Kraft decided what a lot of people had thought in their hearts, which is that Tom Brady would be different. And it's interesting to see now that at the heart of this was that Bill Belichick did not. Bill Belichick, for his sense, and this is where we see for so long, they mention, and there's a great quote in the article here from Seth that says, for almost 2 decades, Belichick has managed to subvert the egos of his best players, his boss and himself, for the good of the team, yielding historic results. This year, though, the dynamics have been different. And we've always heard about that, whether it's Tom Brady agreeing to take less, the general ethos and the Patriot way in that building, and yet ultimately at the end, this decision is driven by the selfishness of both sides. It is Bill Belichick saying, for my career longevity and for what I want to do around here, starting to look at the future in Jimmy Garoppolo and making sure we prioritize that is in my best interest. And Tom Brady sat over there and said, nope, still mine. Still mine. And eventually when the two guys at the head, we always said the tent poles that they had put up were Belichick, Brady, and Kraft. Now that foundation's getting a little rocky. And while it may not affect them this postseason, I think everyone around the NFL, Bills fans like us here at First and Last included, might be looking around at this one and saying, ding dong, the witch is almost dead.
First and Last, the podcast. podcast.
As you have now heard, Seth Wickersham last night put out an article, our ESPN the Magazine's senior writer, chronicling the growing fractures in the relationship between Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, and the powers that be in the Patriot organization. And last night he joined Neil Everett on the 1 a.m. Sports Center to dive further into some of the things discussed in his article.
Seth Wickersham there, and Seth Wickersham here now on the phone. And Seth, Jimmy Garoppolo gets traded, and what makes you think, hey, there's a bigger story than just this trade?
Well, because people inside the Patriots building thought that it made no sense. Now, why would the NFL's most shrewdest long-term strategist trade two quarterbacks in a 2-month span when your starter is 40 years old and has been injured? It just made no sense, especially considering that, he gave Garoppolo away to San Francisco for a second rounder. And so that's what piqued my interest in it. And it turned out that, Bill didn't want to trade. Bill Belichick did not want to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. And then, in fact, it was this sort of impossible situation that was coming to a head in the building, and it's really caused problems that have been behind the scenes for months between the three most powerful men in New England.
All right, so that trouble now, what's the fallout going to be? Now we're public.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that all the issues have started around Brady and his trainer and body coach and business partner, Alex Guerrero. And I think that there's severe distrust in the building with Alex Guerrero. And obviously Bill Belichick has banned his access from much of the building. And I think that at the same time that all this was happening in September, when Brady and Guerrero were starting their new TB12, their book was just coming out, and they were really trying to push this business. At the same time, Brady was talking about playing into his 40s again, and I think that the question in the building was, is Tom going to do it here in New England? Has he earned that right? Or is he going to do it somewhere else? And he was threatened by Jimmy Garoppolo. And, when Jimmy Garoppolo injured his shoulder a year ago, he told people in the Patriots building that he went to TB12 to get treatment, and they wouldn't see him. And he knocked on the door, and it was locked, and he called trainers, and nobody picked up, and he ended up going with the team trainers and only ended up going to TB12 2 weeks later after one of the Patriots officials called and essentially told them, what's going on? Why aren't you treating this guy? And so I think that Tom wanted Jimmy gone so he could have the peace of mind that this was his team. He was going to be the president in the future for a while. And all of that culminated with Robert Kraft essentially tipping the scales and making a football decision. And the next, within a couple weeks, Garoppolo was traded to San Francisco. I mean, Bill Belichick texted Kyle Shanahan, the 49ers head coach, and said, will you give me a call when you wake up? And then when they talked, he said, will you take Jimmy for a second? And that's essentially how the trade went down.
First and last of Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Seth Wickersham will be in studio on Golic and Wingo this morning and get a full breakdown of this article. And, man, I'm telling you can't hear all that and not realize that, A, if Tom Brady can't feel secure in himself and his position in that building, then you truly understand the mentality of almost every NFL player and how replaceable they feel. Like, if that guy even felt threatened by being replaced by this guy in the building, then no other player in the history of the league can enjoy job security. And it's something I've always made clear. And the other thing is, Jimmy Garoppolo is that unrelentingly handsome that he backed Tom Brady into this kind of corner where he felt the only way that he could get out was by making Jimmy Garoppolo leave the building. Too handsome, Jimmy. 888-729-3776. Go to Bill in Wisconsin. Bill, you're on first and last. What's going on?
How's it going, man?
What do you got?
Well, here's how I figure it. For me, I think I'm going with Bill Belichick. As much as I'm a Packer fan, but I'm going with Bill Belichick for this reason. All right, the Patriots, as you know, the model is rather get someone a year early than a year too late. And what they're doing is they're putting the quarterback, as good as he is, he's not. I think about it, you have to look towards the future. And what they're doing is they're making themselves like everybody else. But that's not what brought them to the dance, got them the rings. Because what they're doing is they thought, well, get rid of this person, they get rid of this person, they get something else, they get something better. That's what they did because they're always ahead of the game.
Yeah, no, they're always seem to be on top of it, and that was the difficulty for me when you talked about why Jimmy was the perfect transitional piece, because when you did the math, that was really what it turned into. It turned into a math problem of, all right, we could have Tom Brady at the top of his game because we know the Patriots just won the Super Bowl again last year. We know Tom Brady is probably going to win the MVP this year for the most part. Like, that's insane to talk about transitioning from that guy. But again, that's been the MO of the organization. And when you get a quarterback that you believe is capable of that and is comfortable with your organization in the way that Jimmy was, I'm sure that's tremendously appealing for, again, a coach who sees this as the way to keep his career in New England going and is less concerned with the career and the feelings of Tom Brady. That has been the approach that the Patriots have always taken. But when you've got a player that has enough power and leverage, and that's what this really comes down to, is who can leverage the situation. Tom Brady has enough clout and enough power in the ear of Robert Kraft to merit having his position valued over any other. And so now the tension that creates when you upset the balance of power in the NFL in this way, in a locker room where we traditionally don't think about that being the case, what happens and how soon does it all come apart becomes the real question.
First and last, the podcast. First and last, the podcast.
Robert, you're on First and Last. What's going on?
What's happening, man? That was some good news. I'm driving back into Phoenix this morning, and I get to hear this wonderful, wonderful news, and I really thought about calling, and I was contemplating it, and then I heard you mention Bruce Arians, and I thought, that's my cue. I'll call in. What a great bit of news for the other teams in the league. Doesn't this turn out to be something, to use a Star Wars analogy, it's like the Rebel Alliance just got the plans to the Death Star. Look, there's a chink in the armor. Ding dong, the witch is dead. What a wonderful day. Thanks, brother. Have a great Friday.
Hey, we appreciate the call, and I feel like outside of Patriot country, this is largely going to be the reaction. Like, people can now see, as we look for with all of these great coaches, like, as someone who sat around in college football and witnessed firsthand the dominance of the Saban-led Alabama Crimson Tide, you wonder what knocks these guys off their perch other than old age or sheer boredom on the part of a guy like Nick Saban. And with Saban, it's a lot easier because the egos can go unchecked, and there's never going to be a player or a person in that organization with as much power as him. But the NFL is different. You call coaches by their first name in the NFL. You are on equal footing because the dollar amounts invested in you indicate as such, and usually it sort of messes with the power structure. Now, football is a little bit different in that the chain of command has some benefits, so you usually operate within that. But with Tom Brady, we know that's kind of different, and based on the decision made here, clearly Robert Kraft agrees that Tom Brady is a different case than any other player that they've had. 888-729-3776. You guys can get a hold of us there, but we do have other Boston sports-related news today, and one that the truth himself, the center of this news, is already disputing and sort of chuckling at. Tweeting 6 hours ago, is this really a topic, in reference to the headline on ESPN.com that Paul Pierce doesn't want the Isaiah Thomas tribute video to be the same night as his jersey retirement. Paul Pierce was slated to have his jersey retired in Boston February 11th, the night of their game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. The same night now where, because Isaiah Thomas was on that pitch count the other night, didn't start for the Cleveland Cavaliers against the Celtics, didn't want his video tribute that night. Because for him, and it was well pointed out by my dad yesterday, you've almost at this point, through what we've been through the whole year, forget everything that Isaiah Thomas went through with his sister during that playoff run and what an emotional roller coaster it was for him, ultimately ending in injury, but one that, in addition to his play, so endeared him to that fan base because of how public his struggle was and how we got to live through that with him. And so he, in a lot of people's mind, understandably wanted that to be about his family that night. And if he wasn't starting in that game, he felt that it wasn't going to be fair to them to be able to be there and enjoy and appreciate that moment because they were just as much a part of it. And this becomes a situation where you can understand both sides. You can understand Isaiah Thomas not wanting to force that in a moment where it didn't feel comfortable. And you can understand Paul Pierce wanting a night that was scheduled and supposed to be about him to be about him. But man, it just seems like there's an easy solution to this. Like, is Paul Pierce really married to that idea of February 11th? Is it so important? Does he want to do it in front of LeBron James to be like, hey, look, see, check me out? Did he have scheduling conflicts? I understand he does a bunch of work for us. Maybe it's hard to get time off. I don't know. It seems like if you're Paul Pierce, it's a little easier getting time off than, I don't know if you're saying me. But it just seems like this is one of those situations that's a lot easier to schedule around and move around for him. But in his own words, here is why Paul Pierce claims to not want to have to share his night.
I do think it's interesting, Stack, that you thought he shouldn't get a tribute video. All this conversation over when the tribute video should come, now it's not going to come till February.
And I'm even more bothered that it's coming on, they would want to do something on P's night. I'm even bothered them about that.
IT might have to wait till next year.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Not on your night, Truth. Not on your night.
Put him a tribute video. I mean, they did Crowder. Isaiah, this was your night. Come February 11th, you might have to wait till next year.
Because what is happening on February 11th?
I'm just saying, they're going to retire my jersey. They might retire my jersey in Charlotte if they're doing all this. They're giving away all these tributes. They're going to retire my jersey. So I got records in Charlotte. I got us to the playoffs for the first time, MJ. Let's go. Let's do something for me. God dang.
I want to hear this, Paul. How do you feel about that?
You know, Isaiah, it's like everybody's getting a tribute video now. It's like if you play for a team, you get traded.
Clipper Darrell might get one next.
You get a tribute video. Now, I'm not saying Isaiah shouldn't get a tribute video.
Clipper Darrell might get one.
Clipper Darrell leaves the Clippers as a fan. He should get one. But, like, listen, on February 11th, the night I get my jersey retirement, I'm not sure I want to look up at the Jumbotron and see Isaiah highlights.
Bro,
after all the years I put in.
You don't need to share that with nobody.
You know, I had a chance to watch Kobe's, and throughout the games, the timeouts, it was a lot of tribute videos for him, and I enjoyed to watch that throughout the game. Now, hopefully, you know, the Boston Celtics will do that for me. I'm not sure if I want to see an Isaiah video that night.
See, I can get with the idea that is Paul Pierce Day in Boston. I think, unlike the two of you, it's okay for them to give him a video at some point, whether it is last night or...
Yeah.
It's nice for an organization to show a player. And look, again, they showed some video of Jay Crowder last night. It doesn't have to be a star.
Anything behind for a team to hold on, your video tribute should be sent to you on Twitter or Instagram. Like they could have did the Jay Crowder tribute on the gram, sent it to him directly, and then we move on.
What is wrong with being nice, boys? What's wrong with
There's nothing wrong with being nice, but you don't want to start doing one for Boris Diaw. Then you have to do one for Kevin Martin. Right. Then you have to do one for all these players. You know, just the guys who jerseys go up in the rafters.
Raising your
the guys that put trophies there.
That's what's special.
You put a trophy there.
I agree.
Right.
That's what should be kept kind of sacred there.
First and last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app, Stack out here co-signing, just gassing up. That was Paul Pierce's official hype man, a.k.a. Steven Jackson in the background, just gassing him up through all of that. And we see a lot of the same things pop up here that sort of pop up in this idea of Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Which is, hey, I've accomplished all this. I've done all this. You can wait your turn. You can take a back seat to this. We remember above all else, selflessness is supposedly this great ideal of team sports, but it always comes back around to everyone looking out for number one. And whether it's a tribute video or your status as the figure and centerpiece of an entire organization, none of that really changes.
First and last, the podcast.
And obviously the big overriding topic of today is going to be the Seth Wickersham article about the rift growing between Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and the cracks in the foundation of the Patriot way in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And we'll get back into more of that later. Seth Wickersham's going to be on Golic and Wingo today. All of this, by the way, shouldn't be a misnomer. We're getting ready. We're staring down wild card weekend in the NFL, and this is your reminder that this is not going to affect the Patriots this year. Like, everyone's going to think about this, and this is a story that is going to obviously dominate the weekend. The Patriots have the first round bye, so they're on the bye week schedule this weekend. It'll get a resurgence once we get back to when the Patriots are forced to answer questions about this in a public setting, the guys on this team. But we understand the way they do business insulates you from all of this. Like, you can get by giving a nothing answer for this because you give nothing answers for everything. And if you're a player on that team, you're not concerned about this because your only concern is making sure you stay on that roster, because the culture around that team is one of silence and fear. Silence, because that is what you need in order to make sure that you can quell that fear of being replaced, because that is one thing that is made very clear to everyone there that is not Tom Brady, which is that you are replaceable. That's why we talked about Tom Brady potentially getting moved or overtaken by Jimmy Garoppolo, because that tends to be overwhelmingly the MO in that building, which is no one is above being replaced by younger, cheaper talent. Except for Tom, clearly, as we found out here. But for everyone else, that fear of replacement is what drives that culture in the building that makes everyone work very hard and makes everyone not make waves. Because if you understand, if you just do those two things, you got a pretty good chance with Brady and Belichick of winning a trophy. The question is, going forward now, how does it affect these guys? But we won't, again, have to find out for a while now. This will get legs again when they're forced to answer questions. But for now, we have wild card weekend in the NFL, something the Patriots get to sit out because they're really, really good. But coming up Saturday, we get it started. We got Tennessee at Kansas City, Atlanta at Los Angeles, and then on Sunday, our Buffalo Bills at Jacksonville and Carolina at New Orleans. And it becomes interesting looking at a lot of these matchups. Big news coming for the Tennessee Titans, as it's DeMarco Murray, their running back, part of the two-headed monster of DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry in that backfield. DeMarco Murray will be ruled out of this game with a knee injury. Although despite that, Teddy Bruschi went on NFL Live yesterday and actually believes that the Titans will upset the Chiefs.
Let's start with the game that kicks it off on Saturday, Titans at the Chiefs. Who do you got?
This is my upset.
Look at you.
I'm going with Tennessee. I like Derrick Henry. I think he's going to establish that run game and pound it for 4 quarters. I think Mariota takes it upon himself. I think we're going to see him break out. He's going to have a play. He's going to scramble. He's going to run. He's healthy. Just go for it. I think we see that. I'm just not scared of Kansas City. I don't know what their defense has struggled at times. Yeah. I know Peters is playing well. He'll take that ball away, but they will take care of the football. They'll run that football, and Kevin Byard makes a play to win the football
go ahead.
game.
Love that one.
How about that?
I love that.
There we go.
History is with you. The Chiefs have lost 5 straight home playoff games. The last time they won a playoff game, a home playoff game, Joe Montana was their quarterback.
First and last of Mike Golic Jr., and a lot of the question will surround, can Derrick Henry carry the load on his own? So much of the appeal of, and I hate this term with a passion, the, quote, exotic smash mouth offense had been the ability to use these two backs either in concert or to spell one another. DeMarco Murray, a guy who had that sort of career year with the Dallas Cowboys before a pit stop in Philly, and then wound up in a place where you've got a former offensive line coach at the helm and one of my favorite offensive linemen in the history of football coaching the O-line, which means this place wants to run the rock. And DeMarco Murray was a great guy to do that. Derrick Henry, the Heisman Trophy winner, huge, the only running back I've ever looked eye to eye to. And a guy, if you remember in college, a lot of the talk with him was about the overuse. He was someone that, especially down the stretch of that his season where they won the national championship, this was a guy they would just basically hand the ball off to and say, get 4 yards in a cloud of dust. He took a beating in college in the SEC, which obviously isn't the NFL, but it's darn close at times. And so I think this is a guy who's got enough of that in his past to go ahead and say he's up to the task. I just don't believe the rest of the Titans team is. Like Teddy Bruschi mentioned not believing in the Chiefs. I have even less reason to believe in the Titans. And Marcus Mariota, despite great plays down the stretch to ensure their position in this wild card weekend in Week 17, isn't a guy that's inspired a ton of confidence in me this season. So I would look at Kansas City in that and say they'll get through this wild card weekend, but that defense is, I think, 28th in the league in a lot of different respects, has never recovered from losing Eric Berry, and that offense big play dependent. They go as Kareem Hunt is going to go. And so is that offensive line going to be healthy enough and capable enough to make sure that can happen? Atlanta at Los Angeles, for me, is the easy one in this. Atlanta has been a team of hopes and wishes this season for a lot of people, but has not turned that into any tangible results that I can buy into. If you have been so inept this season as to render Julio Jones, with the exception of 1 or 2 games, largely neutral on the field, you have lost my confidence going into a playoff run where Los Angeles, it'll be my favorite stat last season, top 2 teams with the most snaps played by their starting offensive lines were the Patriots and the Falcons, both wound up in the Super Bowl. The Rams are that team, I believe, still in the regular season in the NFL right now. And you combine that with what we've seen, a system that largely insulates the weaknesses of Jared Goff with great play calling, and a guy that should probably be the MVP in Todd Gurley in the backfield. So that one seems pretty easy to me. Carolina, New Orleans, a lot of that is the same as well. That New Orleans team just too balanced. Carolina and Cam Newton really living by that run game. It's amazing, Cam Newton, the rushing numbers that he's put up, the yards per carry average, a lot of these things that are great for him career-wise for a guy that's been so dominant as a part of their run game. This season more than ever, in a year where we came in and the Carolina Panthers were talking about how much they wanted to limit that ability and that portion of his game in favor of moving the offense to more quick, short passes around Christian McCaffrey, who's been good, but I don't know if good enough to justify that draft position. A lot of that continued thought process about where you can take a running back. So I like New Orleans in this one. It gets interesting then when we look at Buffalo at Jacksonville. Buffalo, our darling story, our recent entry into the Bills Mafia, shows you our rooting interest in this. But when you look at this game objectively as a fan, as an analyst looking at this sport, it becomes a lot more about who's on the other side, because we love that Jacksonville defense. But as Steve Young points out, our ESPN NFL analyst on PTI, there's a reason people love taking shots at Blake Bortles.
It's out of nowhere. He's a good kid. I mean, he's taken a beating since he got drafted. I mean, give him a break. I think mostly it's because they have such a dominant defense. And if he plays okay, this team could go to New England and maybe go to the Super Bowl. So I think maybe that's just drawing the ire of people. When he throws an interception, they lose. When he doesn't throw an interception, they win. So there's something about his performance that's bringing out all this irritation and ire, which is kind of weird because usually they have to mouth off to get that kind of treatment.
First and last on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. I'd be interested. The player in the playoffs that would be most maybe polarizing is not the word, but that you would put most in question. Blake Bortles has to be right near the top, right? As far as question marks in the playoffs. And I feel like in most given seasons, that answer would probably be Alex Smith. Like for a team that's otherwise so good and so capable, we tend to look at Alex Smith as that guy that has a hard cap on the first round of the playoffs at this point in his career. Obviously, we understand San Fran looked a little different. But for the rest of the playoffs, I'd say that there might not be a player who we look at as more singularly the focus of will he or won't he, and Steve Young just mentioned it there. The success or failure of this team when Blake Bortles does or does not turn the ball over. Someone who could I think singularly in a lot of minds, sink or make the ship go in Jacksonville. And while I love that defense, and it was encouraging to see that rewarded this season, we had those 2 10-sack performances from that team that a lot of people looked at as skewing their sack total. No, that just ended up being the MO for the group. And as talented as that defense is, I'm in that camp that just can't really trust Blake Bortles. We've seen Leonard Fournette get nicked up down the front, and you understand that might be as important as anything, as he has been the bell cow and the steadying force on that offense. If I had to pick an upset on the weekend, I would probably go Buffalo going down to Jacksonville. One of those situations where if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And I want to see Kyle Williams score another touchdown. So there's that.
First and last, the podcast. First and last.
time to play the game tweets in. Come on, man. Did you not just say in concert, quit stealing other people's quotes? Bill Parcells, dilly dilly, be original. I don't think Bill Parcells, has the copyright on that one. I'm not even sure I'd qualify that as a Parcellsism. I rebuke this tweet entirely, and I award you no flowers for it, sir. So good luck with that one. Deal with that. If you want flowers, I wouldn't go looking for them from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern either, because Stephen A. Smith has got these takes for you today. Always with more to say. See what he's fired up on now. Again, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio, the ESPN app, Sirius XM, and TuneIn Radio, and catch up with the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast on demand on the ESPN app and TuneIn. No fire Stephen A. Smith takes for you guys today. Seth Wickersham wins the day in that regard. When you drop the article in the middle of the night and you wake up and the streets are talking about it, you win. You've got the day. So don't worry about it. We got you. Anyway, we'll get back to Seth Wickersham, his great piece, the New England Patriots. We'll take your calls. But we wanted to extend an arm to our buddy, the Latvian god, Kristaps Porzingis, Godzingus, the unicorn, the man of many names, who, as the Knicks have now kind of, for a while, really good story at the beginning of the season, Kristaps, bunch of highlight reel plays. The Knicks looked competent for a long time. They were in that playoff rung of top 8 teams in the Eastern Conference, and all was good coming off of the Phil Jackson, Carmelo Anthony era. Well, now we're hearing that unicorns sometimes get worn out.
I'm tired. I'm so tired right now. That's right. I have one day now to rest my legs and then get back and play better and have more energy and also try to bring the team's energy up. It's just, in a tough stretch. Also, the mental part doesn't help at all. When it's mentally tough, you just don't have it in you. And it's normal. It's up and down. So. Get some rest now, enjoy nice Miami weather, and go try to win the Miami game.
First and last of Mike Golic Jr., we feel you. As a show staff that is in large part here during the middle of the night, we feel you, dog. Those days add up after a while. Get a little sleep debt in there. No good for nobody. And for Kristaps, he's having to do it without a lot of the staff around him. Tim Hardaway Jr. has been out most of the month with an injury, so that puts more on him. And just in general, I think this is why more people wanted to see this transition start to happen more last year, to see a team that was more built around Kristaps, because as a young player learning how to be the go-to guy and the bell cow in a league as a 7-footer, and we've seen how difficult it is at times to stave off injury as a guy of that size, to take that pounding night in and night out, especially during a tough stretch right now without his legs under him, shooting 36% of the floor during the current 9-game stretch for the Knicks. He logged 36 minutes on back-to-back nights, and we've heard a lot about those nights on back-to-backs. It's gone against what he expects of himself energy-wise, and as a young guy, you get that. But there is that learning process where you have to look around, and that was, I think, the benefit at the time, certainly of Carmelo Anthony taking the weight off, but we know the affinity that Kristaps had for Carmelo, and having a veteran guy like that around to kind of show you where to dial it back is important. That's part of what we discussed the other day with LeBron James and Kyrie and the Cavs, is those guys have an understanding of this is how we structure our season and build ourselves up workload-wise. LeBron James saying he was at about 85% a couple of weeks ago. They understand that structure and how to formulate their own plan for their bodies and their game control, their game script, in order to make sure that they feel the best going into the most important time of year. Now, the playoffs aren't something that Kristaps has had to deal with or worry about, and so the value system is a little different. But now going forward, as a guy who's going to be tasked with being one of, if not the chief leader on this team, and who has ambitions of making the playoffs, this is going to have to be something he more and more explores, and it's the rite of passage of every young player in almost every league, which is learning how to make sure you're doing all of the things surrounding the sport necessary to take care of your body. And so we can certainly count on Kristaps to do that. Maybe, just maybe, puts a call in to Alex Guerrero, Tom Brady. Pliability. It's all the rage right now. You can insulate yourself from the pains and injuries that your sport might cause. This would be the perfect time. I feel like you could get a discount on that TB12 method right now. Stock is low. Anyone who's taken basic econ, when's the time to buy? Right now. At the very least, maybe he goes picks up the book. Tom can send him one, curry a little bit of favor right now. Because while Tom Brady may not be angling for anywhere new to play it anytime soon, it certainly doesn't hurt to curry a little bit of good favor right now, because the TB12 brand is, after this and after everything we'd heard come out, probably going to take a little bit of a hit. Already was kind of looked at as a little bit of a sham. I don't know. Doesn't seem too far off. A lot of pseudoscience described in the article, viewed by some as maybe a little bit cultish. You can use a little bit of good PR. Go ahead and put an arm around Kristaps like we're doing here at First and Last. Because if anyone can appreciate you going into work a little tired, it's us.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.